Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. Just to highlight, I guess, in terms of the chairmanship of the meeting, the vice chair is going to act as chair for the Finance and Administration Committee meeting, and I believe you're going to have an election in the start of the AM101 session. So we'll kick off with that process. Please forgive my throat a little bit. I'm a little bit croaky. Hopefully I will manage to not lose my voice throughout the course of today. That would be, I hope, a good thing. But with me today, I also have our accountants. We have Dondi Hayhurst from Somerville and Associates and Katala Fairbanks, also from Somerville and Associates. And you would have been introduced to them during the presentation of the audit last week. So thank you for that. So, Chair, I'm going to pass to you to see if there's anything in particular you would like to have the Commission, or the FAC rather, modify on the agenda.
Thanks, Dave. Good morning, everybody. Any amendments to the agenda? Not seeing any. I think we are good to go. You made a motion?
No, that's okay. Okay, we'll consider the agenda adopted. Moving on to agenda item 3, which is an update on the actions arising. So there's no PowerPoint presentation associated with this paper, just the document itself, so paper 03. The actions arising from the 100th session of the Finance and Administration Committee, there were 9 recommendations and 2 requests, and I'm pleased to advise that all of those were completed in quick succession immediately following the last Finance and Administration Committee session. And noting, of course, that most, or if not all, of the recommendations were going straight from the FAC 100 to the Commission, the AM 100, and then the Commission dealt with those accordingly. So there's no particular updates there other than to indicate that they were and have been fully recorded. For the new Commissioner, Commissioner Waddell, the way we arrange this document is that the left column is all of the actions that arose from that meeting. A link to the various paragraphs and the supporting paragraphs for that recommendation, what that recommended text was, and then we try and provide a short summary of the action and how that has or has not been completed. And so I'll pause there to see if there are any questions on the actions arising, Chair.
Questions, anyone? Well, not seeing any, Dave.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. If we could bring up the presentation for paper 4, please. Wonderful. Thank you. So this is the PowerPoint for paper 04, which is the financial statement for FY 2024. And this paper and presentation should be read in association with the next item, which is the Independent Auditor's Report for FY 2024 as well. And so in this document, we provide some general updates and we'll give full financial statements and audited statements are provided in paper 05, and we'll also go through that briefly as well. Now, I don't expect you to read the text on the screen. It's just I wanted to flag very quickly that there was one note at the start of this paper relating to the Salmon Bay headquarters lease. And an explanation of how that lease has now been incorporated into the financial statements. And to provide that explanation, I'm going to pass to Dondi. Should be up there.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I've never been told I'm quiet, so I think the mic will pick me up just fine. So yes, so hopefully you guys in looking at the audit and reviewing it in the meetings noticed your assets went up several $1 million. I think if I'm reading that number right, $2.4 million. And so there is a new lease standard under both the Government Accounting Standards Board and the Financial Accounting Standards Board. So you'll hear us call them FASB and GASB. So the standard setting boards require, so historically leases went on your statement of activities as expenses. Now, starting in fiscal year 23, not 24, we did actually implement this in fiscal year 23's audit. You have right of use assets and right of use asset liabilities. So your leases now, the accounting standards board say these are assets and liabilities, like you're buying a building, but you don't actually get to own the asset. It's just a right of use asset. And so that, and so then in fiscal year 24, with the new extension of the headquarters lease, and I think that was 10 years, is that right? So we extended that 10 years. So we had to make an adjustment, which is why both your assets and liabilities increased for that to meet that accounting standard, so that you're now reporting under GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles. And so, yeah, we just wanted to point that out, that you may have looked at it. We were looking at it, and it looks like in the audit, they wrapped those right of use assets in your capital assets, but then they broke out the liabilities for the current portion and the long-term portion, which again is in accordance with GAAP, but it's not as evident on the page that these assets match these liabilities. And so, so we've this last year and going into fiscal year 25, are working with Dave and the team to figure out how do we continue to track that internally for the reasons you need for the headquarters lease, but maintain GAAP financial statements. So yeah, I think, did that cover what you needed it to cover?
Okay, appreciate it.
Dave, can I just ask you to remind us, I recall that the lease costs actually went down. Can you just remind us the order of magnitude there?
Yeah, thank you through the chair. So the order of magnitude was around a 30% decline or decrease. And I do actually have some slides in, I think it's the FY 2026 presentation. I think it's paper 07, where it actually has a graphic to demonstrate that as well. And that is primarily because of the commercial lease market in most capital cities, but in Seattle, in this case, collapsing following COVID.
So roughly what's the annual savings for us?
It was about $150,000 from FY 2024 to FY 2025. It was significant. Okay, so moving on then, and again, excuse my voice, I sound a little croaky today. And so what Dondi has just explained in that first point there, and this is really the reflection. So our statement financial position at the end of FY 2024, the total assets at year-end closing are 8.107 million, which is up from 6.126 million. And the most of that is this new accounting for the what's now being termed as an asset for the headquarters lease. Yeah. So the total equity or combined fund balance at the end of year closing is 2.278 million. And you can see the fund equity balances there for 10 general, 20 research, 30 statistics, 35 the Alaska cost recovery, and then the FIS fund, as well as the reserve. And so you can see that the reserve, prior to us moving any of the funds, the surplus funds into the reserve, sat at $2.198 million. And yes, go ahead, Commissioner, through the chair.
So on the 2.198, how much, is that all cash, or is that, as you indicated, part of it is a new accounting for these assets?
In this, sorry, through the chair, in this case, that is our current cash reserve in 50 reserve.
Thank you.
And I have a slide in just a moment that will also explain the fund balances at the start of the fiscal year versus the fund balances at the end of the fiscal year, which is what these numbers are. So provided in Appendix 1 of the paper, and again, I don't expect you to be reading off the screen here, is the balance sheet for all funds. And that just matches those numbers, for example, that I was highlighting by fund balance. For the income statement, our budget to actuals for FY 2024, these are provided at Appendix 2. And again, as you can see, the annual budget for income provided on the right there of 9.176 million versus our actual income for FY 2024 was slightly more than that at $9.319 million. And Quite a bit of that, or most of that, was including the additional income provided by the contracting parties to fund the 100th anniversary of the IPHC, as well as an amount from Canada. I think it was 114,000 or 125,000 to contribute to the Fishery Independent Setline Survey operation in FY 2024. Yes, go ahead, Commissioner, through the chair.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Wilson. Just I noticed the interest income was significantly more than was budgeted for. Just curious as to why. Were you more aggressive in investments, obviously?
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, the short answer is yes. So a lot more of the reserve fund was put into a high interest earning account in FY 2024, which resulted in a significant increase in interest income throughout FY 2024. It's also reflective of just the interest rates that were slowly increasing across the board in 24 in comparison to prior years as a result of COVID. Is there anything else you could add there?
I would just say that it's higher interest in a cash account. You use the word aggressive, which translates in an accounting mind a little different. So I wasn't sure how aggressive you were worried about that. So it's not sitting in like a holding fund or anything like that. It's sitting in a Wells Fargo savings account. So, but they did, Andrea and Dave worked well with Wells Fargo to get a better return on the reserves that's sitting there. I hope that helped.
Yeah,
okay.
Sure. That's why you're here.
I just heard the word aggressive. I was like,
And so in terms of expenses for FY 2024, again, I don't expect you to be able to read that, although it's not too bad on the screen. They are provided in Appendix 2. Total expenditures for FY 2024 were just a little under $8.8 million. And this provided a surplus in revenue over expenditures totaling $526,879,000. And you can see that at the bottom there. Just in terms of our overall expected expenses, the Commission did adopt a budget with an expected negative fund balance for 40 FIS in FY 2024 of $394,000. And we were able to reduce that down to about, I think it was $119,000. And so that also helped with ensuring there was a larger surplus for FY 2024. This was the carryover slide. And again, this is provided at Appendix 3. And so provided at Appendix 3, you will see that the total carryover from FY 2023, so the prior fiscal year, to 2024 was $3.4 million, and the total carryover from FY 2024 to 25 is $2.278 million. And you can see in that appendix where you have the starting fund balances, what occurred, the total, whether it was a surplus or a deficit for that fund, which provided those numbers I showed earlier on the screen of the ending fund balance for FY 2024. In accordance with Regulation 12, the internal controls paragraph of the IPHC Financial Regulations 2024, a statement explaining the amounts written off in FY 2024 is also provided in paper IPHC101. And I don't intend on going to that paper, but just a quick note, as we are required to disclose those, that in FY 2024, there were 4 losses or write-offs recorded, and that totaled $217.59. But if you do need to, or if you haven't already looked at those, I do encourage you to look at information paper 01, as we are required to disclose those. And so at this point, before we jump into the auditor's report, just simply noting paper 04, which provides the end of year financial statement. And in addition, information paper 01, the statement explaining the write-offs. And associated with that, noting the process, is that the FAC is requested to recommend that the Commission note the financial statement for FY 2024. With that, I'll pause. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks for the presentation. Any other questions or discussion? Okay with carrying that forward to ourselves? Is a recommendation for the commission? All right, I think we're good to go, Dave.
Thank you very much. And so if we could have the presentation for 05 brought up, please. And that's certainly one of the anomalies that the second performance review recommended. Just for the record, is that the commission formalize its Finance Administration Committee and have these recommendations being considered, developed, and passed to the commission for formal adoption in session. Okay. Paper 05, which is agenda item 5, is the report of the independent auditors and financial statement associated with the presentation we've just provided for paper 04. In terms of process, it's the purpose of the paper is to provide the independent auditor's report in accordance with Regulation 14 of the financial regulations. And associated with that regulation, the text is that the accounts of the commission shall be audited annually by external auditors recommended by the FAC and appointed by the commission. And the auditors shall be appointed for a term of 3 years and may be reappointed. Next year will be our 3rd year with these auditors. And so associated with that, you can expect that we will go out for a general call for expressions of interest from auditors, just to ensure that we're receiving value for money from our current auditors, Clark Nuber, in comparison to others. And that's what we did 2 years ago as well. So back in October, 29th of October, the Secretariat provided the initial trial balances to Clark Nuber, and this was in accordance with our financial regulations. Clark Nuber commenced field work and auditing processes on the 4th of November, 2024. The 6th of November, the Clark Nuber provided the first draft audit reports for review. And then on the 20th of December, in accordance with paragraph 7, the independent auditors provided the final report to the Secretariat. And so the final draft report, I should say, to the Secretariat for publication. And that was 81 days after the end of the fiscal year, which is 9 days ahead of the deadline set forth in those IPHC regulations. And so, again, a good outcome. Last week, it seems so much longer. I was pausing there for a moment. So the 22nd of January, the independent auditors presented their report direct to the commission, and they offered their unmodified opinion. And just a reminder that an unmodified opinion implies that the auditor was satisfied with the financial statements audited. And this means that the statements met the requirements demanded by the regulations and that they were prepared in accordance with appropriate accounting principles, criteria, and standards. I'm going to pause at this point, as there are a number of new components that were presented by the auditors at last week's meeting, and I've asked Dondi just to walk us through a little bit more of an explanation of some of those new accounting requirements as part of the auditing. So I'll pass to you, Dondi.
Thank you. And so this isn't really in the presentation, but I'm going to talk specifically to some of the questions you asked during the auditors meeting. One of them being the management override of controls. That is, and Mitch mentioned it in our meeting, that it's required. It's not something they get professional judgment on like the other audit risks. So thanks to Enron, WorldCom, Tyco, several of those in the early 2000s that had clean audits, what you would call a clean audit. And there were significant management override of controls. And so I just wanted you guys to know that wasn't something in their planning meeting that they sat down and said, oh, we see something in past audits that might trigger this. That is a given for auditors these days. 20 years down the line, it came out of Sarbanes-Oxley. I can kind of give you a history lesson if you're interested. But and so it's been growing, but I think it was more in the accounting industry. It wasn't so much out front for the board and the finance committees. And so in the last couple of years, both the auditing standards and the government auditing standards have pushed that further to the public. And so now it's in your engagement letter. When the auditors say, hey, you're going to audit, you're going to engage us to do this specific kind of audit, which is an independent financial audit. In there, they have to say what they've identified as your top risk factors. And one of them has to be management override of controls. So he listed 3 that they identified, but I just wanted to clarify that that's one that is always for any entity that's audited. Management override of controls is a top risk, because your internal controls is what protects the assets and the resources of the organization. And so who can break those down? Management can. The example that Mitch gave right off the top of his head was one where an executive is going to charge personal charges to the credit card. I think that's one that everybody kind of looks for. When I was an auditor in a past life, I had one organization that the CFO actually misappropriated assets. So it wasn't for his benefit, and he didn't embezzle, which is what most of us are thinking about, is they use nonprofit resources for private benefit. And also embezzlement is what most people think of when you hear the word fraud. But it's also just a misappropriation of the assets. And so that's what Katala and I work with the staff on, is making sure your internal controls are such that doesn't happen. We do our best to find that doesn't happen. But that's also what the auditors are doing in their planning session. They're brainstorming, how do we find this? How do we design our testing so that we're looking for that? But like I said, the CFO, he took building campaign assets and paid for the CEO's kids' tuition. That's a misappropriation of assets. So that's what we're looking for. That's what we're trying to protect and deter. But I just, like I said, I think I've gone a little higher over that, but I wanted you to understand they didn't see something to say, oh, management override of controls is happening. That's just a given for them. The other things, the cash basis versus GAAP basis, as you guys know, has been the 3-4 year process for us, and we're there. But in this last year, I kind of alluded to it in trying to figure out, how do we give you what you need for your internal reporting? Because some of your things are cash basis, like the grant is going to be a cash basis, but the commission wants to report on GAAP basis. And so we have to find a way to bridge that gap between the 2 different kinds of reporting. And so the auditors, a lot of that is done with journal entries, and the auditors are looking at our work to determine, is that in line with GAAP accounting? I think that was one. And the other question was the MD&A. I think you brought to that last paragraph about the outlook going forward. And so I just wanted to mention that was required. The auditors told we had to put that paragraph in there. And so not to those words, we have to have an analysis, a summary analysis of, from the report date going forward 12 months, does management expect any changes? And so that's kind of specific to that paragraph, as we're looking specifically just in the next 12 months, not so much the next 3 or 4 years. And I know you guys are working on your budgets 3 and 4 years ahead of time. So just to kind of bring the difference between the audit report and what you guys are dealing with in your ongoing operating. And so I think going forward, knowing some of the things you brought up in the meeting, that would be good to figure out, how do we mention some of those things without it sounding like there's a going concern?
So if I can just interrupt there, I take it you're referring to the language about saying the commission is well positioned to still have successful financial programs.
Exactly.
Or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was just a summary analysis of fiscal year 24 and looking at fiscal year 25, and not seeing anything significant that would be unexpected.
Okay. But I also gather from that there's nothing that prohibits also including some language to note other challenges facing the commission,
Right.
Specifically this issue about funding for the survey.
Exactly. And I think we could look at that for the fiscal year 25 audit.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Commissioner, I just wanted to point out that while having some of that language in there, you do want it to be a positive look forward, because there is not currently a going concern of the continuation of IPHC. But to include some of that would be beneficial, especially for you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, as you probably gathered when I brought it up last week, it's in the interest of just being transparent about
Right.
the challenges facing the organization.
Yeah, and so, excuse me. So just to add to that again, is that the specific text that you're referring to in this case is really just highlighting that the commission has gone through that positive process of modifying the survey in this case, which is also a negative. But in this case, it's been modified. We've budgeted accordingly. We've set up a survey design that we believe is fiscally responsible for FY 2025. But I think, as you pointed out, the longer term picture is the impacts that might have on data and the like. Okay. So for this, it's simply just a matter of the FAC noting paper 05 that provides the independent external auditor's report as per regulation 14 and recommending that the commission accept the independent external auditor's report as per regulation 14, the financial regulations. And so I'll pause there, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that. So I think it was in the auditor's report that there were figures quoted that we've all seen before about ongoing needs, future needs that included annual funds to subsidize the FIS, annual increase for contributions to the FIS reserve, and an inflationary adjustment for the contributions from both the parties. And Dave, I'm just wondering if those are figures that we need to update. You know, they're now a year plus old. In addition to inflation in the intervening time, there may be just additional information that we have that from sharpening pencils, maybe we got a better handle on those estimates. Do you have any thoughts on that or recommendations for us?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. What I might ask is that if I actually have that slide, which includes all of those numbers in the next presentation, and I've sort of proposed that exactly that. I think those numbers do need updating, given that was from December 2023. So if that's okay.
Yeah, we can just hold on that.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I couldn't remember if that was in the audit report or not. Great. Okay. Any other questions or discussion, Neil?
Stood out to me in the auditor's presentation to us was the sort of top 10 risks slide that was near the end of the deck. I thought that was a good opportunity for us to think about how we assess this in a systematic way, or at least how we respond to what they present to us. I don't know, David, if you've given that any thought, but I'm interested in, how we use what the auditors have provided us here to sort of focus our attention on things that might sort of put our operation at risk. So yeah, interested if you have any initial thoughts there, and maybe we can take it from there in terms of just further discussion.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Commissioner Davis, through the chair. The short answer is yes. I think it would be very beneficial for us to take a sort of a step-by-step approach through, at least initially, let's say the top three risks that have been identified. And one of those is the information security side of things. And I think that's probably the first step, is just to confirm how secure, in this case, financial information, but also more broader, the information that the Secretariat holds on behalf of stakeholders, and doing that kind of cybersecurity risk assessment would be very, very beneficial. You can do that on a whole range of levels. I know Rob Tynes, who's sitting behind me, has already done that periodically over time, but maybe that's something we can formally document. Maybe dive a little bit deeper as well into some of the emerging threats, cybersecurity threats, and document that and provide it to the Commission. I'm trying to remember that the second one is more about ensuring that we have sufficient talent, and I have the talent sitting beside me, so it's fantastic. But again, it's something that we should probably undertake a periodic review of in terms of what's needed to meet the financial regulatory requirements. In this case, moving from our cash basis of accounting, OCBOA, to GAAP, FASB GAAP, GASB GAAP. Let's get them in GASB GAAP.
Well, the audit's on GASB.
Yes. So in short, I think there is going to be quite a bit of merit to step through at least the top three initially, and provide the commission with sort of a summary report of where we think we're at with each of those threats.
Anything else? Okay, if not, are we okay with recommending that the commission adopt the audit report?
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, so if we can have the next presentation for paper 6, please. So paper 6 is agenda item 6 as well, and this is our standard, or what's become our standard, financial update proposal to the commission. And we've taken this step in recent years, primarily because the Fishery Independent Setline Survey is not adopted until after that fiscal year budget has already been adopted for the first time. And so as I said, in this case, it's Intersessional Decision 09, whereby the Commission intersessionally adopted the the 2025 Fishery Independent Setline Survey design. And so that has now been updated and incorporated into the proposal for a renewed FY 2025 budget. In addition, we take the opportunity, given that we are already, when this paper is published, several months into the current fiscal year, we take the opportunity to update some of those budget lines to accommodate changes that have been implemented. And some of those are, for example, by that time, we've already signed the meeting venue contracts, so we know exactly what it's going to cost us. And health insurance premiums for the current fiscal year have also been implemented by that point. And so we have a more specific amount that we're able to document in the budget. To accommodate those changes, of course, there are a number of other things that we need to do in the budget. And so rather than simply reducing those numbers and returning funds to the Commission, you'll notice that in the bottom of the budget, so Appendix 1 of this paper, Appendix 2 is what's called their contingency budget line. And so any savings that have been realized as part of this rebudgeting process are being collated into that extra or contingency budget line. And the intention is not to spend those funds, but given that we're continuing to try and build up the reserve, and as we've utilized in this past year, funds to take from the reserve fund into the Fishery Independent Setline Survey for 2025 as well. And so that's what that bottom line is now. It's the savings that we've identified as a result of those changes. So in terms of a bit of historical process, the Commission adopted the FY 2025 budget with the contributions from Canada having been received, $970,606,000, and the contributions from the US to the general fund of just over $4.4 million, as well as the contributions to the headquarters building lease of $458,000. And a reminder that this number was reduced for FY 2025, but the US agreed to make the full payment that was previously approved, and for any cost savings to be moved into the reserve fund at the end of the fiscal year. And so that's what will occur for FY 2025. So in terms of the FY 2025 contributions received to date, we received Canada's contributions in full prior to the start of the fiscal year. And I'll just highlight that's the first time that we've received funds prior to the fiscal year starting, and it certainly is greatly appreciated. And the US has made almost the full appropriations amount, contribution amount as well, of 4.796, noting that they're still under continuing resolution and have indicated that this remaining $84,000 is coming when those appropriations are finalized for 2025. Just as a sort of a broad brush comment, I guess, as of 13th of December, when this paper was published, the income and expenses for FY 2025 we're broadly in line with the approved budget, with a number of the lines underspent in comparison to sort of where we were expected to be. So there's no cost overrun as we were approaching the end of the first quarter for FY 2025. Specifically related to Fund 40, the Fishery Independent Setline Survey, so noting that that was adopted intercessionally, there were a number of key components or elements associated with that decision. The first is that the design agreed to via intercessional decision 09 was that there would be an income of approximately $1.741 million, which included $387,000 in supplementary funding or voluntary funding from the US for the Fishery Independent Setline Survey, and an expense for the footprint of the FIS in 2025 of just over $2.6 million. And so this has a deficit, would lead to a deficit rather, of just over $905,000. Originally, when we were proposing that to you as part of that intercessional process, we were expecting a higher deficit. And so we've been able to really look at those numbers, refine them, and while we don't have the final bids in yet, and that's expected, I think it's February 3rd, our current estimate is that that's going to run with a deficit of $905,000. Recalling that the Commission has approved, as part of intercessional decision 09, the movement of $1 million from our reserve fund to Fund 40 to cover that deficit. The assumptions associated with those calculations is that there'll be no bid inflation for FY 2025 compared to the prior year. That's a big question mark at this point, and we should know more in a couple of days, so by next week, when we receive all of those bids from various interested captains and owners. We are also expecting a 5% decline in total landings or catches from the Fishery Independent Setline Survey, and this is consistent with the stock assessment projections that Dr. Stewart is going to present to you later this afternoon in the Commission meeting. The assumption is also that there will be no change in average fish price. And again, this is quite a large assumption, but given that fish prices has generally declined in recent years, we did see a little bit of an uptick in the last year. It's a pretty good assumption. But just a reminder that a small fluctuation in fish price and catch rates can lead to substantial fluctuations in our total balance. Yes.
Yeah, I recognize the difficulty in making these assumptions. For B, I was curious as to, are you talking a 5% on what was expected or a 5% of total as compared to 2024?
Yeah, thanks for the question through the chair. So it's our actual catch rates in FY in 2024. So those that we actually encountered in 2024, not those that we predicted for 2024. So yeah, go ahead.
So David, on the preliminary information we saw in December, I thought the coastwide 032 numbers were down 9% coastwide. And so this suggests a 5% reduction. Maybe I'm getting lost in maybe Peter's question, but could you help me on that?
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair. And so this is also based on the footprint of the FIS that was adopted. And so we look specifically at where we're intending, or the Commission has approved us to go and sample in 2025. And those catch rates can differ or will differ in comparison to the coastwide level that you are speaking of. And so, for example, the reduced footprint is generally in areas of slightly higher abundance in the core or just south of the core. And you also agreed to fishing within area 2A and also 4A and B, where the catch rates are lower. And so we then average all of that footprint expected catch rates to come up with an approximate 5% decline.
Just on that, it seems like we're having a broader survey and, change in average price. It depends on where you catch generally. And so if you're catching less in a general area that pays more and catching more in an area that pays less, just wondering if you've done any analysis of that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question through the chair. The short answer is yes. Again, through the simulation tool that we use to come up with the expected revenue and costs associated with the footprint that's adopted, also has fish price by specific area. And so as a result of that, we're able to account for the differences that you were just mentioning, where, for example, in area 2B, fish prices are typically higher than in 2A or 2C. And so again, we're putting that fish price, what we expect for that particular charter area. And that, as you said, differs coast-wide, but then we're coming up with an average. The other two components is that we will be undertaking the oceanographic monitoring, and so the 8 water column profilers will be deployed as part of that decision, and we will be placing 1 setline survey specialist on a NOAA trawl survey in 2025. And again, just thanking our NOAA colleagues for making the accommodation for us this year. And on the other trawl survey that we won't be staffing, they tentatively agreed to undertake at least a reduced sampling for Pacific halibut. So we're very appreciative of that, noting that there's a cost for them. And so, as I was also pointing out, the other main change that we make to the budget in year is just for those in-year modifications. And so the bottom line there is it says we're able to update costs primarily associated with AM101. So the contracts for the meeting venue, travel associated with the meetings, and the facility rental. So the headquarters lease and maintenance as well, noting that the US paid the full amount that was previously projected, but there'll be cost saving associated with that. And so that, as a result, leaves that contingency budget line, which has increased. And then, so Chair, this was the slide or the text that you were referring to. And so over the last year and a half or so, almost 2 years now, the Commission, via the 2 contracting parties, have been developing a process to seek supplementary or voluntary funding from a range of sources. As a result of that, and again, these numbers were calculated in December of 2023, is that we were of the opinion at that point in time that the FIS would require roughly $1.5 million to annually subsidize the FIS moving forward, at least in the short term. In addition, it was felt or agreed that we should try and continue to build the FIS reserve up to the target of approximately $2 million US. And then to achieve that is that we would seek $100,000 to $500,000 from various sources, whether it be from contracting parties or other, to ensure that we were building that reserve towards the $2 million mark. C and D were really estimates at that point in time of predicting 10% inflation in relation to the contracting party contributions at that point in time of 4.3 for the US and 927 for Canada. And again, I think all of these numbers, A through D, are at the point where we should probably sit down again and relook at those numbers, particularly now that we have a very good grasp of what the base block design would cost us moving forward as a rotational design for the Fishery Independent Setline Survey. And then maybe to even separate these 2 points out. We have one which is dedicated for the Fishery Independent Setline Survey versus probably a different budget discussion for the annual contributions from the contracting parties for the general fund. And I'll pause there. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I would find it really helpful to update those figures. I know I get asked by various stakeholders and occasionally U.S. congressional staff about what IPHC's needs are. So having updated figures would be really helpful as soon as you can pull those together. Sure. Other questions, comments? Mark?
All right, thank you, Chair, and not to perhaps belabor this, but equally, I guess we would appreciate that as we have our own discussions on our sides, and equally face the similar dynamic as John's indicating with regards to engagement from both stakeholders and our elected officials. Separate and apart from this, and perhaps I should have raised it when we were on the FIS item earlier, Canada would be positioned to provide a supplementary contribution of 300,000 American dollars this year for the FIS for our upcoming sort of challenges with regards to that pressure. So would like to see that reflected in the amended numbers that we would put forward in terms of calculating. That's above and beyond our normal contributions, of course.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Appreciate that very much.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. And so we'll record that in the report as well and express the appreciation. Thank you. The other point worth highlighting, I guess, is Fund 35, which is the Alaska cost recovery expenses. And so for FY 2025, we budgeted just under $1 million for those expenses. However, we are aware as well that NOAA has indicated that the cost recovery component that will be available for use in FY 2025 will be $792,523. And so there is a cost difference there in income and expense, where the Secretariat is currently looking at ways and means of ensuring that we reduce our footprint and expenses for the sampling program within Alaska to as close as possible to that $792,523. At this point, quite comfortable with 2025, and I just want to highlight that we are quite comfortable that we're going to be able to hit that amount of $792,000. Primarily because we have made a number of other cost savings associated with the grant. And the US also provided $150,000 in supplementary funding for the support sampling in Alaska, originally for FY23 and FY 2024. But NOAA Grants Management Division has indicated that we can't spend that for prior year expenses. And so that money has rolled forward for FY 2025. And so the combination of that supplementary component being provided by NOAA, associated with some cost reductions that we're able to implement for FY 2025, we're comfortable with the amount of $792,000. More broadly, and in the next presentation, when we start to talk about the path forward, there's going to be some challenges in terms of what we estimate our expenses are going to be for that program versus what's recoverable from industry as associated with the cost recovery program. And so that'll be a discussion that we'll have shortly as part of the looking forward component.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate your highlighting that. So just as a reminder, this is going to be a perennial challenge with this budget line with the cost recovery grant, because by its very design, it can't cover 100% of the expenses. And so IPHC will always have to find some way to make up that difference. I think it's, and Dave may be able to speak to this more clearly than I, but it's a factor of certain expenses being allowable under the cost recovery rules as expenses of the IFQ program, as opposed to just sort of ongoing costs that are halibut related, but not directly attributable to the IFQ program, and other factors like that. So it results in some stress maybe from an accounting perspective as to how to have all of that line up. But again, it's a perennial issue. It's just one we'll have to continue to deal with. Neil?
So I do remember us talking about this before. I guess I'm a little fuzzy, maybe that's just memory. How are we going to manage this in a way that it is not a liability for the Secretariat and for the Commission?
Yeah, thank you for the question through the chair. So as part of the next presentation, but I'll quickly cover it now. There are a couple of options available to us. One of the options that I want to highlight is not really a viable option is to continue to make programmatic reductions. And the reason for that is that the funds that are being provided are based on funds cost recovered from expenses 2 years prior. And so if I just run that scenario, if in the current year we spend $1 million, we can expect $800,000 to come from the grant. So there's going to be a $200,000 deficit, a 20% deficit. If you reduce those costs and you bring it down to 800,000, in 2 years' time, you're still only going to get $800,000 or slightly less, even though just through inflation, salaries go up, things get more expensive. And so the program, you can only reduce to a certain minimum to ensure that you have that robust data collection program. Because there's a 2-year lag in the funds being recovered and then utilized in year, there's always going to be this gap. And if you try and chase that number down, in essence, it will just keep going down. It will cycle downwards to, I'm not sure what number, what level. And so the only way to mitigate that is to find a means to cover whatever the acceptable gap is going to be for the Commission. If the acceptable gap is, we'll budget $1 million and we expect to get 80% of that from the grant, is to come up for a means to fund that other 20%, whether that be through contracting party contributions or some other means.
David, this is an amount over and above the 4.4 million dues that the United States gets from the State Department?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, and just one other challenge associated with that is there's only so much cost recovery funding available for these grants. And so in cases where the applications for cost recovery funds exceed the amount of cost recovery funds available, then the grants are reduced kind of at a prorated value across the board. And so in this current circumstance, with revenues being down in the fishery, cost recovery income is down. And so that tees it up for that type of a likely reduction. And obviously affects all the potential recipients of cost recovery funds, including my office, including our law enforcement folks, the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. It's not unique to IPHC. Yep.
So if I understand right, John, we may not know how much we would have to budget for in terms of, making up the difference between what we'd receive from the cost recovery fund and what the actual cost was. Is that sort of the upshot of that?
Yeah, very much. That is a challenge. And I'm not sure what sort of factor you've used in the past for that to sort of make some assumptions on a likely shortfall amount just for planning purposes, but essentially it's making an educated guess on what amount we'll have to cover.
Yes, through the chair. And so for example, we're currently running on an approximate 20-25% deficit is what we're looking at. As part of paper 07 that's going to go to the Commission meeting, if you recall at the interim meeting, you asked for the Secretariat to provide sort of a cost breakdown by port. And as part of that, we're able to sort of refine a little bit more of where we could make some additional reductions or whether we've hit that sort of base sampling design for the port program. But at the moment, it's roughly that sort of 20-25% is what the difference is. Noting, of course, that as the chair was pointing out, we've pretty much hit a cap or an expected cap for the cost recovery component, the 3% fee program, and the indication is that it's unlikely to get much higher than $800,000 into the future. And so we're then able to project that with inflation, that 20 to 25% will start to increase based on inflationary pressures.
Yeah, thank you. Just wondering if there's any idea on technology that would, as fisheries adopt electronic logbooks more and more, is there any possibility of cost savings on that part in the future?
Yeah, thank you for the question through the chair. The short answer is that there will likely be some cost savings, primarily through that logbook entry component at headquarters. It'll take a number of years to work through that and see what those cost savings could look like. But the port program itself does a lot of additional work, such as actual biological sampling when catches are landed. And so there is a component there that even if we weren't doing the logbook elements, still needs to be done. And so again, there would be a minimum that we could potentially reduce it down to, but there's a core component that we need to still collect the biological information in port. And I think Monica's behind me, so Monica, I'll just take some notes, and maybe during presentation 07, you could also provide a few more details about that. Okay. So the recommendations from this paper is simply that the FAC note paper 06, which provided the update FY 2025 budget, and that the FAC recommends that the Commission adopt the amended FY 2025 budget, noting that it does not change the previously adopted contracting party contributions, and those are just listed on the screen there. As part of that, again, I'll just highlight that any savings have been recorded in that contingency budget line, and the intention is not to spend those, but to roll them into the reserve for potential future use as the Commission may decide. In addition, associated with that is that the FAC would note the optional extra budgetary contributions for the International Fisheries Commission Pension Fund deficit, and that will remain at the amounts previously endorsed, about just over $150,000. And that should be a comma, not a dot there. And then I think it is worth noting that the cost recovery expenses are budgeted at $999,000 for 25, when we expect the 792, and that the Secretariat is working to identify in-year cost savings to make up the shortfall in funding. Also noting the additional contribution of $150,000 provided by the US for the NOAA grant that's available for use in FY 2025. And so if that's agreeable, Chair, we could leave it at that.
Okay, very good. Anything further on this? We okay with moving this forward? Looks like we're good, Dave.
Thank you very much. Okay, if we could just have the next presentation up, please. I don't know if it's possible to get the air conditioning turned down. It's like getting blasted from this vent here. It is a bit chilly. Okay, so this is the final paper 07, that's before the FAC, and this is the budget estimates for FY 2026 for approval, and 27 and 28 for information. And this is in accordance with Regulation 5, Paragraph 3 of the IPHC final regulations, where we're required to provide that 3-year forward-looking budget to the Commission through the FAC for adoption and noting each year. So for FY 2026 first, and I'll focus most of the presentation on 26, noting that 27 and 28 are sort of a nominal increase, approximately 5% year on year. So for FY 2026, as provided at Appendix 1 of the paper, the base contributions to the general fund would include an approximate 5% increase from FY 2025 for both contracting parties. And so for Canada, that would equate to $1.019 million, and the US $4.642 million. And again, these are the contributions to the general fund. So these general cost assumptions include increases in overall operating costs, including a 5% based on cost of living and step increases for salaries and wages, and approximately healthcare cost increase of 10%. And again, that's provided in Appendix 1. So that's just sort of the broad overview, and then I'm going to try and step into the details. As mentioned, for the headquarters lease, which the US pays directly, is estimated at $364,162 in FY 2026. And so this is the lease and maintenance in accordance with the new lease signed in 2023. The deficit payments for the pension fund remain at $150,573 for each contracting party. And this is the amount that the actuary for the pension fund calculates every 3 years. And the deficit 3 years ago, I think they're going to be, yes, they are going to be doing a new assessment this coming year, stood at just over $3 million. And so that amortized over a 10-year period, you come up with $150,000 per contracting party. And so there's no change there, but we do expect the new actuaries report in, I think it's March or April of this year. And then that will adjust the amounts, the deficit payments for FY 26, 27. Yes, go ahead, through the chair.
Does that 10-year ratchet down every year? Does it go to 9, 8, 7, or does it stay at 10?
Thank you for the question. Through the chair, it stays at 10. And so it's a 10-year amortization that's recalculated every 3 years. And so again, they will express it for the next 10-year period next year. Just a reminder that the budget estimates for FY 2026 for the FIS, so Fund 40, are very much tentative, and that we'll go through the same process that we've gone through this past year of looking at the outcomes of the 2025 FIS to determine what the 2026 FIS footprint should look like. And as a function of that, the Fund 40 budget would need to be amended accordingly. So please just note that that's currently very tentative until the 26 design is determined by the Commission. Now, Appendix 1 has that summary budget by fund. And so, again, I don't expect you to be looking at what's on screen at the moment, but you do have the document before you. And I'm just going to step through some broad graphics for those budget lines, and maybe that would also serve as a good discussion point. So what you see on the screen is the contracting party contributions to the general fund from 1986 through to FY 2025, which is those that are already approved, and then these next 3 years, which are currently up for discussion. A few quick things to highlight is the sort of the overall flat contribution rate, from both contracting parties up until FY 2000 rather. And then a divergence with the US providing additional contributions for a number of projects, primarily in Alaskan waters. The US contributions slowed between about 2015 and recently 2023, and then have again ticked up for the last couple of years. And similarly, over the last couple of years, there has been an increase in the contributions from Canada as well. With that same information adjusted for inflation, and so based on 2024 US dollars, you can see that particularly in the areas where the contributions were maintained at a constant level, what that means from an inflationary point of view is that the effectively the contribution value has been declining over that period. And this has certainly caused quite a number of recent problems with the operations of the Commission more broadly. And I think that's all well known, so I won't go into the details. The headquarters lease and maintenance, and so this is the discussion around the previous lease and then the new lease that's kicked in, and you can see that there has been a sharp decline in the expected costs of the headquarters lease as well as the building maintenance components. And so that's been a bit of a pressure relief. And again, that's primarily due to the commercial real estate market in Seattle and more broadly becoming highly competitive. And as a result of that, the consultants that we were able to use, the brokers went out and negotiated with our landlord a much more positive lease for the commission. So it's very positive. So I'm going to step through each of the primary budget lines and just give you again that history of what has happened and what the projected 3-year budget would look like. So the first is the account line 50,000, which is salaries and wages, so for the staff. And as you can see, the 5-year look back has an average of 3.77% increase from 2020 through to 2025. And then we built in an approximate 5% increase moving forward. And again, that is modified in year based on staff turnover, staff increases associated with performance and the annual step increase process we go through. The assumptions, of course, are that we maintain the current number of FTEs at the Secretariat for FY 2025. Looking at benefits, so account line 5100, you can see that from the period 2020, so the last 5 years to 2025, there's been a pretty aggressive reduction in overall benefits that we have applied for the Secretariat staff, and we've applied a reduction of 17% over that period. Moving forward with the increase in health insurance costs and other standard benefits, we project an average of 8.19% from FY 2025 to 26 and moving forward. I would sorry, go on.
Just a quick question of clarification. I may have missed it. Is this the amount we had budgeted or the amount that we have actually incurred year over year? I didn't.
Thank you for the question through the chair. This is the amount budgeted each year. And so this is where we've gone through and reduced benefits and not put them in the budget and made those savings. Just trying to think as well, just might add to that as well. For example, in FY 2024, we spent I want to say it was about 80% of the budget. And again, making those in-year constant reductions to benefits.
Dave, what's an example of where we have reduced benefit expenditures?
So a number of places. If you were to look at the liabilities associated with the health reimbursement arrangement, we have made significant reductions in the allowances for staff to carry forward balances. If I look at the start of this, so FY 2020, for example, it was an unlimited carryover. And there were accounts that had $160,000 to $100,000 in them as carried forward as a liability, which that staff member had the right or ability to utilize fully. We have periodically reduced that from those amounts down to what stands now as a $15,000 rollover. And we have a number of staff who are at that $15,000 cap, which means that they also don't receive contributions. And so as a result of that, you're able to average it and come up with a more robust number of what you are going to expend in a given year. Excuse me, my nose is starting to run as well. Okay. The assumptions are, again, maintaining the FTEs that we currently have on staff, a 10% increase in annual healthcare costs, and this includes a whole range of insurance components, and a 5% annual increase in other costs. Training and education, we're projecting or have budgeted rather from FY25 to 26, just under a 1% increase. This is one that does fluctuate, as you can see on the screen, over time. And the training component, particularly over COVID, we reduced our travel footprint to bring field staff to headquarters, for example, and that just fluctuates over time as we move forward and we try and adjust to an in-person and hybrid training environment. And so an example of that is when a staff member requests to undergo a particular training or a course, we look at both in-person options, depending on how close that is to the office, versus an online course, which has a zero travel component to it. And so they just fluctuate year on, year out. But moving forward, we're looking at keeping that pretty steady with a nominal increase over the next 3 years. In travel, again, there's been some fluctuations, and this is primarily due to the changing work environment, meeting environment post-COVID. You can see in 2020 and 2021, we just held the budget steady, and there were actually quite some savings there associated with doing that. From FY 2020 to 2025, there's been a 29% reduction, and that's just point to point. In 2026, we have budgeted rather an increase in that travel budget up by 10.61%. And I'll just highlight that that's primarily due to the Western Groundfish Conference, which is going to be held in February. And typically we send 5 to 10 staff to that meeting. And so that's something that at the moment is proposed and results in that larger increase. This also fluctuates based on locations of annual meetings and associated travel with that. Just varies. A little bit more expensive in US locations, yes. Good news in Bellingham. So it's essentially hotel costs and per diem costs are on it.
Oh, what city?
Bellingham.
Oh, Bellingham.
I'm sorry. IPHC meeting costs. So from FY 2020 through to 2025, I haven't put the increase there, but it's marginal. And we're expecting a 3.48% increase from 25 to 26. And so the IPHC meetings are the annual meeting costs for staff, the work meeting costs, and any travel or a meeting costs associated with the subsidiary bodies. And so whether that's the SRB board coming to IPHC SRB meetings or the research advisory board stakeholders coming to participate at the headquarters location. So that's all wrapped up in that expense line. Technology was an account line we created or separated out from other account lines in FY 2022. And we're just expecting a nominal increase of 3.57% into 2026. And this is simply to meet our technology replacement schedules. And so that's just, we have all of our technology, whether it be laptops, computer screens, desktops on a regular replacement schedule. Professional fees covers a range of things, including auditors, our accountants and the like. And so again, this is something we created in FY 2022 and separated it out from contracts and leases into its own accounting line. And we're expecting a nominal increase of 3.24%, or have budgeted rather, into 2026 and moving forward. Other fees and charges relate primarily to D&O and director and officer insurance and general liability insurance and vehicle insurance. And again, a relatively nominal increase of 4.5% just to accommodate those charges. leases and contracts. And so this is outside of the headquarters lease. So just this is everything else. In this case, it's primarily to do with research that Dr. Planas is undertaking. And just a reminder as well as that's supplemented with external grant funding to cover that 10.26% increase. And that, as you can see, is something that will fluctuate quite widely depending on the external research grants that we receive.
I think that drop is where we separated out the accounting fees.
That's true, yes. So that was in that previous slide, that this one, the professional fees. So it looks like a large drop, but it's just moved to another account. And now these are a much clearer measure. Supplies expense, just a nominal 3.33% increase expected moving forward. This just covers everything within the office and generally to allow us to function. Maintenance and utilities, it's just a nominal increase of 3.56%. And then again, this covers a whole range of things just associated with ad hoc maintenance within the headquarters building. The facility rental, and again, this is just a reflection of two components. First of all, the lease reduction, so the 17%, as well as the national or the NARA storage cost reductions. And so this is where we implemented a number of years ago a document retention policy, or disposal policy is what it's really become, where we're going through many of our archives and just slowly eliminating them if they are non-essential records. And so that's also just resulting in quite a substantial cost saving. So that was it for 2026, 2025. In most cases, you've seen the projections there. It's based on a nominal average 5% increase, but it doesn't mean that that 5% is applied to each of those budget lines. It's each of the budget lines projected forward on the percentages that you just saw on the screen, which works out to be an approximate 5%, nominal 5% increase year on year. And so with that, we're asking the FAC to note the budget estimates provided for 2026 and recommend them to the Commission for approval, and for 27 and 28 for information. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Dave. So we have, as you know, had some ongoing discussions, Paul and I, with you about reducing discretionary spending, taking a hard look, acknowledging all the strides that you and the team have made in recent years, but essentially taking a fresh look across the board at what we can do. And I think that is quite important and appropriate given where we are financially and given our challenges with the survey. And would certainly like to see those discussions continue with an eye towards what we can refine for the FY26 budget before we adopt it. Along those lines, included in that, we've talked in concept about potentially looking at meeting costs, annual meeting cost reduction options. And you had opined about some different possibilities and indicated a receptivity to looking into some of those things in more detail. So I think it would be very useful for the Commission to have you carry that forward and come back to us with something in writing with some specific suggestions or options along those lines. You had mentioned the concept of redesigning the meeting to shorten it, perhaps, the annual meeting for cost savings. I, for one, think that we ought to not be overly constrained by the way we have structured things in the past in terms of how we chart a path forward. And in that regard, would like to see your outlining of options include some options for the Commission's structure with the advisory bodies. And in particular, if looking at the structure with the conference board and the processor advisory board and the meeting facility costs, the room rentals, and how that fits in with food and beverage minimums and so forth. If perhaps something, and that recognizing this would be a bit of a shakeup from past practice, but if the commission were to look at the option of a single advisory body rather than two advisory bodies there, does that lead us on a path that would create some cost savings? And obviously, we would want to confer with stakeholders about that, get their input on how that could work. Perhaps some thoughts on design for ways to make it most workable, but would appreciate your assistance in laying out some options for us on that. Also, although the Pan Pacific is very nice, maybe there are options for cheaper venues. I guess just in general, I think it should be a rigorous look at options going forward to see where there might be opportunities for further cost savings, just in light of our predicament. So those are some of my initial thoughts for additional information that should inform our decision before we adopt an FY26 budget, but welcome thoughts from other commissioners. Mark?
Thanks, John. I think you presented that well. And I mean, we had the opportunity to discuss this briefly earlier. And, you know, I think we sort of collectively owe it as parties to ensure that we're taking an appropriate look at the operations and using that as a means by which we can continue to work respectively with our governments to try and alleviate the fiscal pressure that we're facing here at the IPHC. In doing so, we will ourselves face questions as to what scrutiny have you applied to the organization. So it's not to presume that we're headed in a certain direction at present, but it is to sort of evaluate and kick the tires on a variety of things and debate the merits of those, such that we can have a robust discussion when we go back to our respective officials and make the case for the IPHC.
Thanks. Any other commissioner comments or Peter?
Just going back to technology, and you said parameters of new computers and the like, and that you have a schedule. I'm looking at $200,000. That's a lot of computers annually. And so could you just get into that a little bit more, because just curious. It's a large expense.
Yeah, thank you very much through the chair. So the hardware is only a component of that. There's a lot of software associated with it, and that includes, for example, our meeting costs for Adobe Connect and those kinds of things. But if, with your indulgence, and I can put Rob on the spot, maybe Rob, if you want to just quickly come up and talk a little bit about what's in that technology budget and what some of those replacement schedules look like.
Yes, through the chair. We currently have for, I would say 75% to 60% of the budget is on software costs, which is Adobe Connect, our Microsoft licenses, Procurify, which is approximately $20,000 a year for our procurement system, and Applos. I don't know what the budget line is for that one. And also about $24,000 a year for our virtual hardware environment and Microsoft Azure and different.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's much beyond just the hardware. So that's thank you.
Dave, the past 2 years, if I recall correctly, we have not approved an annual budget at the annual meeting, but have put that off for intersessional discussion. So I guess my thought is given all of these variables and the prospect for identifying some cost savings, that would be a prudent approach now. I know you like to have it tied up at the annual meeting if possible for planning purposes, but that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And as you pointed out, we can function with a delay in that budget approval process. It's obviously not ideal, and we can only make so many commitments within the next financial year without an approved budget. I would just highlight as well that the meeting venue contracts have been signed for FY 2026. And so the proposal that I'm going to bring forward to you is really looking at some of the subsidiary body options that we could look at for in FY 2026 and then 2027. And so it's 2027, we would be back in Canada for that annual meeting cycle. So some of the other components as well will be relatively quick to sort of turn around and have a look at and provide those sort of justifications of what's needed and what could potentially be cut. But I have a lot of ideas in that regard, and so it's something that we can bring forward relatively quickly after the commission meeting closes. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, great. Thanks for that clarification. Mark?
Just, I mean, sensitive to, as you're indicating with regards to contracts and the like, Canada did come to the table prepared to adopt the budget today as presented, but recognizing obviously the discussion that we've had, would elect equally to sort of hold off on that, but would commit to paying quickly, recognizing we benefit from the offset of our fiscal years. So nonetheless, try and alleviate your own pressure as soon as we possibly can.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Does that do it for this agenda item?
That's it. That's it. Thank you very much, Chair. And so at that point, other business, and then in terms of a report adoption process discussion. So,
Okay. Is there other business for the Finance Committee? No. I had intended to bring up some of the cost reduction options, but it seemed to fit well with talking about the FY26 budget. So.
Okay, well, thank you, Chair. And so in terms of the report adoption, and just a reminder that we have to adopt a report from this meeting to the Commission. It looks pretty straightforward from the decisions that are being made, and so we'll be able to turn that around very quickly. And in terms of adoption via correspondence, so we would circulate that draft report to the commissioners and your selected advisors, and then if you could get those edits back, at least as a first round, later today, and then maybe this evening we would adopt it via correspondence. And then it gets published tomorrow morning or tonight, and then re-presented to the Commission as recommendations from the FAC to the Commission for adoption soon after lunch tomorrow. If that's agreeable. Thank you. That's all I have, Chair.
Okay, last call. Anything else? If not, the committee is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Oh, you got up easily.